Well, let's unpack this one. Jack the Ripper. I mean, it's one of history's most chilling, uh, most stubbornly unsolved mysteries, isn't it?
Yeah,
A name that still sends shivers down your spine, even 137 years later.
it really does. It's lodged itself deep in the public imagination.
And just recently, things got stirred up again. There was this huge buzz, wasn't there? A claim of a definitive DNA breakthrough promising to finally unmask the killer.
Yeah, that definitely made headlines. It's always fascinating, though, how new evidence, or maybe the claim of new evidence, can suddenly emerge in these old cases.
Right.
But it also reminds us that knowledge, especially scientific claims like this, it's really most valuable when it's understood properly and looked at critically. You can't just take the headline at face value.
Absolutely. And you, our listener, you've sent us just a stack of sources on this, everything from those big headlines about the DNA to, really detailed historical analyses, stories about the victims themselves, which often get overlooked, and even discussions from online forums. So our mission here in this deep dive is to sift through all of it. The claims, the counterclaims, the compelling stories. We want to give you a clear, balanced picture of where this infamous case actually stands today, and maybe why it still grips us so much.
Sounds good. Where do we start? Back in Victorian London.
Let's do it. Picture it. The year is 1888, stretching into 1891. We're in Whitechapel, London, an incredibly impoverished area.
Yeah, a place of real hardship, fear, brutality. This was the backdrop for what the press dramatically called the Autumn of Terror.
And it's so important, like you said, to remember the people at the heart of this, amidst all the horror and frankly, the sensationalism around the killer. These were real women, not just names or statistics. They each had stories, struggles, often with alcohol, poverty, just trying to survive day to day through sex work, cheap lodging houses. It was a desperate time.
Exactly. And there are 5 women generally agreed upon as the canonical 5. That just means the victims most experts feel are definitively linked to the Ripper's pattern. Their lives, sadly, have often been completely overshadowed by the killer's mystique.
It's a crucial point. So let's just briefly touch on their tragic ends, using details from one of our sources, all that's interesting. First was Mary Ann Nichols. She was 43, found on August 30th, 1888.
Right. Her marriage had collapsed. She was struggling financially, apparently turned away from her lodging house that night because she didn't have the money, possibly drunk.
And later found throat cut, stabbed in the abdomen and vagina. Just horrific.
And this chilling pattern, this brutality, it just continued, didn't it?
Right.
And seemed to escalate. Just over a week later, Annie Chapman, 47.
September 8th.
Yeah. She'd also faced a lot of hardship, illness, poverty after her husband died. She was found in a backyard, terribly mutilated was the phrase used, throat cut, abdomen just, entirely laid open, uterus, other organs removed.
The level of violence is shocking. Then, September 29th, 1888, we get what's called the double event. First, Elizabeth Stride, 44, a Swedish immigrant.
Right. Her throat was cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated. But interestingly, she wasn't as mutilated as Annie Chapman, which led to speculation, even at the time, that maybe the killer was
Interrupted, and then possibly struck again very soon after.
Exactly, because just 45 minutes after Stride's body was found, they discovered the 4th victim, Catherine Eddowes, 46.
And her murder was even more brutal, wasn't it?
Yeah, arguably the most brutal up to that point. Throat cut, disemboweled, her face terribly mutilated, and her left kidney and most of her uterus were removed. This escalation, the increased savagery, it really seems to mark a horrifying pattern.
And finally, the 5th canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, much younger, just 25, found on November 9th, 1888.
And her death. Well, it was the most gruesome of all. Inside her own room, abdominal cavity carved out, parts of her face, breasts cut off, and arm removed. Organs strewn about the room. Her heart was missing.
Just unbelievable. The sheer pathology there in that last killing, it shows a terrifying progression.
Absolutely.
So, beyond the horrific crimes themselves, something else was happening. The legend, the name Jack the Ripper, was being forged right then.
That's right. Initially, some reports used the name Leather Apron, but that didn't really catch on in the same way.
No.
And this brings us to the media's role, which is fascinating. The name Jack the Ripper first appeared in the Dear Boss letter. That arrived at the Central News Agency on September 27th, 1888.
And at first they thought it was just a hoax, right?
It did, yeah. But then, just 3 days later, you have the double event Stride and Eddowes. And Eddowes' earlobe was found almost severed.
Ah, and the letter had mentioned clipping ears?
Exactly. It had that chilling line about, clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly. Suddenly, the police thought, hang on, maybe this is the killer. They even published the letter, hoping someone might recognize the handwriting.
Desperate measures.
Very. And then just a day after the double event, October 1st, the Saucy Jackie postcard turns up at the same news agency. Similar handwriting.
And it mentioned the murders.
It did. It referred specifically to the double event. Apparently before that detail was widely public knowledge. That really seemed to lend it authenticity at the time, cementing that name, Jack the Ripper.
And there was another one, wasn't there? The From Hell letter.
Yes, the From Hell letter, sent to George Lusk, who was head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, on October 16th. That one came with a small box.
Entertaining.
Half a human kidney, preserved in spirits. Dr. Openshaw examined it and said it was very similar to the kidney taken from Catherine Eddowes' human female left kidney, signs of Bright's disease, which Eddowes reportedly had. But ultimately, the findings weren't conclusive.
Still incredibly chilling.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the crucial context, something that comes up a lot in, say, online discussions like on Reddit.
Wow.
Most authorities today consider pretty much all these letters to be hoaxes.
Really? Even the ones that seem so specific?
Yes. It raises this huge question. How much of the Ripper story, the actual character we think of, was a media creation? Newspapers back then were absolutely sensationalizing things to sell copies. They capitalized on the fear.
So the press didn't just report the terror, they arguably helped shape the legend itself.
I think that's fair to say. They named the monster, in a way, and that legend is a massive part of why we're still talking about it.
Which makes those recent headlines even more striking. All that history, all that mystery, and then suddenly, February 2025, reports pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
137-year-old mystery solved.
Right. Driven by claims from Russell Edwards, an author and historian.
And his claim was pretty specific. He said DNA evidence from a silk shawl supposedly found at Catherine Eddowes' crime scene
Yes, that shawl is key to his claim.
identified the Ripper as Aaron Kosminski, a 23-year-old Polish immigrant barber. Died in a mental institution years later, 1919.
Kosminski was actually one of the police suspects back in the day, though never charged.
Right. And Edwards said DNA from blood on the shawl matched Eddowes' descendant. And crucially, semen found on it matched Kosminski. He sounded completely convinced, quoted saying he was dumbfounded they'd found him.
It sounds incredibly compelling on the surface, doesn't it? A direct DNA link. But this is where that critical eye becomes so important.
Okay, so let's apply it. What's the counterargument? A scientific skepticism.
Well, digging into sources like the Forbes article on this, several major issues jump out immediately. First, this wasn't brand new research dropped in 2025. It was actually first detailed in Edwards' book back in 2014, and it faced criticism even then.
Okay, so not exactly breaking news in the scientific community.
Not really, and the bigger problems lie with the evidence itself. First, the shawl's provenance, its history, its chain of custody. Is it definitely from the crime scene? How has it been stored? And crucially, how many people have handled it over 130 plus years, likely with bare hands?
Right, contamination would be a massive issue.
A huge issue. Geneticists like Adam Rutherford and Tori King have been very vocal about this. And then there's a type of DNA reportedly found, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA.
Okay, you mentioned this requires a bit of technical understanding. Break it down for us.
Sure. Think of mtDNA as being passed down only through the maternal line. Mother to all her children, but only her daughters pass it on further. So, yes, you could potentially link female remains like Eddowes to her living maternal relatives through mtDNA.
Makes sense.
But for a male suspect like Kosminski, his mtDNA comes from his mother. His sons would not inherit it. So you can't use mtDNA to definitively link him to his male line descendants. It's great for excluding people. If the mtDNA doesn't match, they're out. But it's very, very limited for making a positive ID of a specific man.
So even if they found mtDNA that could belong to Kosminski, it wouldn't necessarily pinpoint him specifically, as opposed to, say, any other man is his maternal line, or even someone unrelated with a similar common mtDNA profile.
Exactly. It's a probability game, not a unique identifier like nuclear DNA often is. And that nuance gets completely lost in headlines screaming solved. The criticism from geneticists was harsh, calling it terrible science, unpublishable nonsense. They pointed to issues like lack of detail on methods, missing data, questions about the lab standards.
And there were other credibility questions raised about Edwards, too.
Yeah, apparently related to another case, the Moores murders, with allegations of a fake discovery. So putting it all together,
It sounds like the scientific community is far from convinced.
that's the bottom line. Despite the headlines based on this specific claim and the evidence presented, the case is absolutely not considered solved by experts. It highlights our desire for answers, maybe even forcing evidence to fit when it doesn't quite hold up to scrutiny.
Okay, so if the latest DNA claim is shaky at best, let's step back. How did investigators originally try to figure out who this person was? And how do modern techniques look back at it?
Well, one fascinating figure is Dr. Thomas Bond. He was a surgeon involved in some autopsies, and he's often credited with doing some pioneering criminal profiling.
Really? Back in the 1880s?
Yeah, he went beyond just the physical evidence. He offered a psychological sketch. The killer was likely quiet, unassuming in appearance, maybe middle-aged, solitary, probably daring and calm. He even suggested the killer might wear a long coat, maybe a cloak, to hide bloodstains, since the attacks happened quickly in public or semi-public places.
That's quite insightful for the time.
Yeah.
And it challenges the idea that no one ever saw the killer, right? I read there were actually quite a few witness statements.
There were more than a dozen descriptions from 1888, which suggests maybe the police just weren't sure who they were looking for or maybe had preconceived notions.
So how do modern profilers view it?
Modern psychological profilers tend to agree with Bond's idea of an outwardly normal individual. They think Jack the Ripper probably looked and acted perfectly sane, blending in, which contradicts that Victorian idea of a madman looking obviously deranged. And geographical profilers, analyzing the crime locations, they've pinpointed the killer's likely comfort zone, probably his residence, to a specific area, Flower and Dean Street in East London. Right in the thick of it, very close to where the victims lived and were killed.
And technology's even tried to put a face to the name.
Kind of, using something called E-fit electronic facial identification technique based on consistent elements from those witness statements, they created a composite image. It shows a man about 5'5" to 5'7", stocky build, full face, dark hair, dark mustache, probably between 25 and 35, fair complexion.
Wow. Seeing that image, even knowing it's speculative, it does make it feel a bit more real.
It does. And then there's the question of why the killing stopped after Mary Kelly.
Yeah, what are the main theories there?
The common ones are the killer died maybe through illness or suicide, he was imprisoned or institutionalized for some other crime, or maybe he simply left the country. We just don't know.
Which brings us back to the suspects. You said over 100 names have been floated over the years. Kosminski was one. Who else stands out?
Well, one really interesting angle mentioned in those Reddit threads you found is the Jack didn't exist theory.
As in, no single killer.
Exactly. The idea is that the press essentially created the character of Jack the Ripper, the serial killer, but the actual murders might have been committed by different unconnected individuals. Maybe Charles Cross killed Marianne Nichols, maybe Joseph Barnett killed Mary Jane Kelly, perhaps Jacob Levy killed Catherine Eddowes.
That really leans into the power of media sensationalism we talked about.
It does. It suggests the legend itself might be the most enduring creation. But if we look at more conventional suspects, well, the police at the time looked at John Pizer, leather apron, but he had alibis.
Okay.
There was Francis Tumblety, that American doctor with the collection of uteri.
Oh.
Very creepy, but his links to Whitechapel at the right times were tenuous, and he fled England anyway.
What about later theories? Any big names?
Oh, the most famous, though totally debunked, was Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson.
The royal connection. Always grabs attention.
Always. But he had solid alibis, wasn't even in London for most of the murders. Then there was Joseph Barnett, Mary Kelly's lover. Police did look at him closely, wondering if he killed her in a rage and staged it, or killed others to scare her off the streets. But they ultimately cleared him.
And the artist, Walter Sicker. Patricia Cornwell really pushed that theory hard.
She did, based on interpreting his art and handwriting analysis of the Ripper letters. But most experts dismiss it. Again, lack of solid evidence. He was apparently in France for some murders, and, well, the letters themselves are likely hoaxes anyway.
Right, relying on the letters is shaky ground.
Very shaky. There are others. Mary Piercy, a woman executed for a very brutal Ripper-like murder. H.H. Holmes, the American serial killer, his descendant claims handwriting matches and points to his surgical skills. James Kelly, who escaped Broadmoor Asylum in 1888 after killing his wife, and whose profile supposedly matched. The list goes on and on.
It seems endless.
It really does. And despite all these theories, all the investigations, the DNA attempts, Adam Rutherford's conclusion seems pretty spot on. The question of his identity, I am confident, will never be known. The trail is just too cold, the evidence too compromised.
You know, diving into all this, the awful details of the victims' lives, the media frenzy, the DNA debates, this whole parade of suspects, It really hammers home that Jack the Ripper is so much more than just a cold case file.
It really is. It's become this enduring cultural touchstone, hasn't it? A sort of blank canvas onto which we project our fears about violence, urban life, the unknown.
Yeah.
And the fascination, maybe it isn't just about finding a name. Maybe it's more about how an unsolved mystery like this gets woven into history, how it shapes our understanding of crime, the power of the media, forensic science, even our own curiosity about the dark side of things. This deep dive, looking at all those sources you gathered, it really shows the interplay between, scientific inquiry, trying to find facts, and the sheer power of storytelling, the narratives that get built sometimes on very little evidence, like those letters. It asks us to question not just what happened, but how these stories get told, retold, and remembered.
That's a really powerful point, and it makes you think, what is this case always feeling like it's just about to be solved, but never quite getting there? What does that tell us about our own need for answers, for certainty, in a world that's often full of unknowns? Something for you, our listener, to mull over.